Hi there and welcome back. You're with Terry from Bonsai Tree. Today I'm going to be doing an update on 6 projects. First up we have a Juniper Tanuki. If you find the following content helpful, then you can thank me by clicking the thanks button just below the video. This Tanuki was featured in earlier videos and I'll post a link to that on your screen now. In fact, this one was one of 5 or so Tanukis that I made all at the same time, and it was also featured in a blog. The trunks for all the Tanukis that I made were from junipers that I had tried collecting, but unfortunately they all failed. Rather than throw the trunks away, I thought they could be reborn as Tanukis. The juniper species that I used for the live trees is the common mint julep that can be found at most retail nurseries, at least where I am in South Africa. The Tanukis were created in November of 2020, which makes it only 3 years. In that short time period, they have really developed beyond my expectations. Already, the live vein is developing nicely and swelling and closing the gaps between the dead and the live, and the branch structure that I've started to create is also becoming quite evident. The blog post gives much more details, but in essence I used fasteners, in other words screws, to attach the live to the deadwood. The wounds created by the screw heads are now almost invisible. After carving the trunks initially, I then sent it away to be shot blasted. Shot blasting is not the same as sand blasting, and in fact little pellets are used and this creates a texture on the wood. This texture that was created actually has worked very well in that it catches dirt and has created a premature aging effect on the wood. The wood to date has not been treated with any preservative or lime sulfur, for instance, and the intention for that, or the reason behind that, is to allow the natural aging and process to occur on the wood. The carving that I did was done sympathetically so, in the sense that it follows the grain, and you can see now how the cracking of the wood naturally that occurs is also now contributing to the characteristics. As I mentioned earlier, the structural branching has now only just been completed recently when I styled the tree as part of a demonstration to the Cape Bonsai Club in Cape Town. So at this stage I'm just allowing the branches to grow uncut so that they can set in position. The foliage type of this juniper is fairly coarse, and so I don't expect to ever really get a very well defined or refined foliage pad, but I will do my best at achieving that. Whilst doing the demonstration for CBK, I was asked the question of whether it wouldn't be a good idea to graft a better foliage type onto this tree, to which I had answered that I didn't really think that a Tanuki deserved that kind of effort. There's also a lot to be said for mint julep as a species to work with. It's extremely robust and very fast growing, so it's a great species to work with when doing Tanuki. As you can see from the growing tips, this tree is extremely vigorous, and this is the kind of state of health that you always want to be working with when you're designing or working on your junipers. At this time there's not really much that I can do with the tree, seeing as it was recently styled just a month ago, and so all I'm going to do now is just weed it and give it some new fertilizer and put it back out in the sun on the bench. The next project I'd like to revisit is a Neagari style pyracantha or firethorn. This is one of the many trees that I've field grown, and it was featured in its own video earlier, and I will put the link to that on your screen now. I'm not quite sure where I got the idea or inspiration to do a Neagari or exposed root style with the tree, but when I dug it out, I made sure that I dug as many of the roots as I possibly could, thinking that I would be able to use them in the creation of this tree later on. When I built the temporary container for the tree, I made sure that I used these horizontal slats so that I could remove them one by one as time went past and as I wanted to expose more and more of the root system. I also used a medium-sized pumice, which would act as a very coarse growing medium and encourage the development of new and more root system. Today all I'm going to be doing on this tree is to defoliate it, and so that I can see what the structure looks like and do any necessary pruning to it. I don't even think this tree has been out of the ground for 1 year now, so the rate at which this pyracantha develops is extremely quick. Generally, I would not advise completely defoliating any collected tree or tree that has been dug recently or repotted recently, as the technique definitely weakens it, but this tree certainly has the reserve energies to withstand that and not suffer any setback. Usually I would recommend that you remove flowers and therefore avoid setting fruit on a tree that is still in development, but I wanted to see what the berries looked like, the color, and so at this point in time I'm just going to eliminate the berries. The reason for wanting to avoid the setting of berries or fruit is because it's simply a waste of energy, and you'd rather direct that energy into the development of the structure of the tree or the ramification. To date, no wire has been used in the styling of this tree. It's been completely clip and grow, and so I'm really just cutting or pruning back the tree to a shorter internodal distance so that I don't have any long straight sections that don't have any taper and are devoid of any interest. I said a moment ago that wire hasn't been used in the design of this tree, but that wasn't entirely true, as I have used wire in order to shape some of the roots. I would say that with Neagari style, the shaping of the roots is as important as those of the branches. So what I'm doing now is just removing the wire that has started to bite in on the roots. What you'll notice is a piece of wood that is also supporting the main trunk, and this is as the roots have not yet hardened off enough to support the weight of the tree. I will check on this every few months, and then of course when it's strong enough I will remove that piece of wood. The next project, an olive tanuki, has actually not been featured on my channel before. However, the trunk that I've used to graft the live olive onto comes off of a tree that was featured on this channel. If you'd like to check that one out, I'll put a link to the video on the screen now. So much like the tanuki I featured in Project 1, I had a trunk which I couldn't dispose of, and so all it took was really just going down to the local retail nursery and getting a young olive, which is what I grafted onto this trunk. In this particular case, I didn't use mechanical fasteners to attach the tree onto the trunk. Instead, I carved a groove into the trunk and laid the young sapling of the olive into that. Since then, I've just been allowing the growth to extend and thicken up the trunk so that it fills that groove, and then also starting to work on the structure of the tree. I also kept many of the branches that were originally on the trunk, the now dead trunk, long, and this is what I think contributes a lot to the characteristic or the interest of the tree, and that is what I'm also styling the live portions now through to emulate. So it's still very early days in the development of this olive tanuki, but it's an exciting little tree, and I'm looking forward to the development of, or seeing the development of it over the next number of years. The fourth project that I'd like to update you on is this ficus root over rock, which is one of a number that I did at the beginning of this growing season. Ficus natalensis, which this species is an extremely strong grower, and you can see that in a very short space of time it has already put on quite considerable growth. Today all I want to do is defoliate it so I can see the structure, and then put some wire on it and give it a little bit of shape. I'll be using aluminium wire for the styling, as this is not as aggressive on the bark, which tends to be thin on these species. It's always important to ensure that the tension that you apply the wire with is not too much, because this means that the wire will bite into the branches very quickly, and although it's now in summer, the tree will fatten up during autumn, and so that's when you really need to watch out for the bite. Once you've applied the wire and positioned your branches at the angles that you desire, you can then go back and reduce the wire on branches that are too long perhaps if you need to, and then cut those back so that they fit within an imaginary outline for the profile of the tree. The raffia that was used to attach the tree to the rock has started to perish, and I can just remove those pieces to clean it up a bit. Many aerial roots have begun to develop, and if those are kept, they can be used as part of the roots that clasp the rock. The fifth update is on a bunch of Japanese black pines, which I've featured on my channel in various videos. Rather than linking to a specific video, I'm going to link to a playlist, and then you can just select which videos from that you want to watch. I started out this growing season with a lot of 2-year-old Japanese black pine material, which I'd grown from seedling cuttings. Some of the material I planted into these small containers and then wired and shaped them. The biggest difference that you will see between this material and material that I'll feature shortly is that the size of the container had a profound effect on the development of the tree. That is to say that trees that were in small containers had a small amount of growth, and trees that were in larger containers, such as the air pots, had the most growth. Depending on the size of tree that you wish to grow, this will determine the size of the container that you require. Some of the 2-year-old material I attached to small stones and placed it into these clay development pots. Wire was applied to the trunks and allowed to bite in, as this accelerates the thickening. I like to use parafilm grafting tape to attach the roots to the rock, as this keeps them moist in the beginning when they're exposed, but afterwards it rapidly deteriorates and starts to break down, and you can then at this point in time just peel off those pieces and throw them away. Here's a great comparison of the effect of the container on the development of the tree. Both trees are the same age, but you can see the tree that was developed in the air pot has developed considerably more than the one that was grown in the clay pot. So if you're looking for a smaller root over rock, then it's advisable, in my opinion, to use a smaller container so that it's easier to control the growth. This future shohin tree was grown in a very small plastic container, and as you can see, wire was used once again to accelerate the thickening of the trunk. I found this technique to be extremely useful, especially for developing shohin sized trees, and I'll link to that video on your screen now. This tree is the same age as the previous one that I showed you, except it was developed in this air pot. What you'll also find is that when the wire has bitten in, you get a concentration of hormones in the raised sections or the raised portions of the trunk, and this very often will pop out new buds. On this future Bunjin style, most likely black pine, I want to show you where the wire is starting to bite in right at the bottom of the trunk. I usually find that the wire starts to bite in higher up the trunk, and so I start to unwind the wire, but very often the lowest portions remain intact for quite some more time. However, once it does begin to bite in low down in the trunk, I remove the wire, reposition it, and then reapply the wire following the same path as the wire was applied previously. With this technique, knowing when to remove the wire is important, otherwise the object will be defeated if you remove the wire too early. The wire applied to this tree is bitten in just enough and it can now be removed. After removing the wire, it can then be reapplied, but of course adjacent to the wire bite. This Neagari Japanese black pine was featured in a video that I did earlier on in the season, specifically in summer, when I demonstrated the ideal pruning techniques to use for this species. You will see that as a result of the pruning that I did, there are many buds that have now formed, and growth is in places that will become very useful for me to develop the future structure of this tree with. In that same video, I also demonstrated a technique of reducing the sacrifice trunk, and this is an update or just shows you what the resulting scar looks like after some months. When the new trunk line has fully established, this sacrifice trunk or branch will also be removed using the same technique. The last and final project of today's update video features a Korean black pine. It was featured in a video that I did earlier this season on the decandling of pines. The fundamental goal with decandling is to achieve better ramification, and for that to occur, obviously you need more than one piece of growth. However, when you have 3 or 4 or even 5 buds developing at those cut terminals, it also becomes a problem. If the summer buds are allowed to develop indefinitely, they will obviously create a coarseness to the branches which you want to avoid. It's however very risky to eliminate those buds very early on in the season, because you can damage the buds that are adjacent to them which you actually want to keep. My strategy rather is to go in towards the tail end of summer and eliminate the buds that I don't want. The new summer needles are not fully hardened off, but they're a lot hardier, and it does allow you to go in and work on the buds without too much damage. Ideally, you want to eliminate the very strongest of the buds. Also, as this tree is in refinement, you'd rather prefer to keep the weaker buds because this controls the growth better. In fact, part of the strategy of keeping this tree in a refined state is to utilize the fact that the energy will be dispersed amongst all of these buds. So what I'm effectively saying is that if you were to eliminate all of the excess buds in the early part of summer, just after they start to develop, this will lead to all of that growth at that point being pushed into the remaining buds, which are then therefore likely to develop a lot stronger and a lot coarser, and maybe in a refined tree like this, that growth will have to be eliminated. If you found that content helpful and you'd like to thank me for it, please do so now by clicking the thanks button just below the video. So that's all I have time for today. I hope that you've enjoyed this update. If there are any other projects that have been featured on my channel previously that you'd like an update on, please do comment below and I'll do my best to feature it in a future video. Thanks so much for watching. I do hope that you've liked and subscribed to my channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.